Hello and welcome to Unbox the Podcast, the podcast that helps you live your best life. I'm your host, Sahar Huneidi-Palmer. Unbox Coffee Break started in the lockdown of 2020. What developed was a true sense of community, virtual community, and I found a new way to support my friends, followers, and those who needed help. I'm just going to say a few words tonight to introduce my guest. I'm very excited. I'm dedicating this one to men, all men who have influenced our lives, because I really feel that in 2020, with all the talk of women empowerment, etc., men feel ignored, sidelined. And tonight, my guest is my old friend, colleague, former client, Coach Taymour, the man who knows all about men. He's been an executive coach as well as a personal coach since 2003. Welcome, Taymour.
Correct.
I'm so happy it finally worked.
Thank you. Finally. It's nice to be here. Thank you very much on this special occasion.
Thank
and
you.
I do apologize to you and everybody who's viewing the mishap we had with the technology. So I do apologize, but it's nice to be here finally.
No problem. They'll come back. They're loyal followers. Thank you. You're a very old friend, but we're not going to say how long. And I'd like to think that I had a hand in introducing you to your soulmate, your beautiful wife. I attended your wedding, you attended mine, and I shall always treasure a memory when you and Nikki read poems at our ceremony.
Let me put
especially meaningful. My wedding anniversary is coming up in a few days. So this is great that you're here with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Let me just say that we've known each other since I used to have hair on my head, and then it moved down to my
That is the first man problem, isn't it?
Well, I don't know about problem, but it is what it is. You know, you get on with it. Anyway, thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. Let me begin by first asking you the first question. What is it like to be a man in 2020, and why do most men, 70% of men in fact, classify their mental well-being as below sub?
Yeah. Well, there are so many reasons that I've had to think about what I need to omit from saying tonight, because there is so much to say. The state of men these days is actually terrible. There's a lot of talk about women's success, the feminist movement. I couldn't be happier. As a brother to 3 wonderful sisters and an uncle to 4 nieces, I want women to succeed. But I refer to men these days as the forgotten gender, because they're taken for granted, and they're assumed that, you know, everything is going to be okay with men, they can handle it. When you look at the numbers and the facts out there of what is going on with men, it's actually heartbreaking. I've got some numbers here which I'm going to share with you. For example, 93% of workplace fatalities are men, 97% of war fatalities are men, 75% of the homeless are men, 93% of work fatalities are men, war, homicide victims as well. So all of that is above the 95%, 94% and up.
Gosh.
Not to mention the high suicide rate. I mean, suicide seems to be the #1 killer of men under the age of 50. It kills more men than car accidents.
Is this internationally, or in the UK, or also here in the Middle East?
Based on the research that I've been doing, is predominantly in the US and the UK, because I'm writing a book about all this. However, I did come across an article recently about Gulf states, specifically in Kuwait, where suicide is going up, and the majority of the people who commit suicide and go through with it are men. So it seems to echo in the Middle East as well, and I'm sure the numbers are there in parts of Africa and different parts of Europe, because men now are very much alike in the sense because of technology and how connected we are. So when you look at the numbers, it's actually heartbreaking. And in 2012, I lost a friend of mine who was in his early 70s to suicide. Not until today, we don't know why he did it, but you know, he lost his life. And since then, I've been quite curious about what's going on in terms of mental health with the state of men, because no one seems to talk about it, especially men. They bottle it up, they don't share their feelings, and then they implode. Consequently, we don't have the answers we need. But when you look at the research and you look into certain trends and changes that have happened, the factors are many. Going back to 2020 and how men are, I'm going to say 2019 because 2020 has been a very strange year, which
Sure.
needs a whole podcast on its own.
Sure.
But I think fundamentally men today are quite confused because they're constantly being told what not to be, but no one seems to clarify what they're expected to be.
That's right.
So there's a huge gap in terms of, well, what do you want me to be? Do you want me to be the person I'm programmed by nature to be? Or do you want me to be the soft metrosexual kind of guy who waxes his eyebrows and this, that, and the other? So they're quite confused. And when men are confused, they don't address it and converse very much. They clam up and hide. So what you see a lot among young men, specifically teenagers and young men in their 20s, they do something called caving, as in going into a cave and caving.
Oh, caving,
and
yes.
Caving. And what they do in that caving is essentially they hide behind video games, smoke weed, drink, and relieve themselves to pornography. So they have, in a way, withdrawn from society.
Okay, let me ask you, is the suicide rate highest among younger men, or is it all men? Can we have a range? An age range?
Well, I would say between 22, 25 to 50. And it does go into the 50s and 60s as well. But the number one killer of men under the age of 50 is suicide.
Really? Because
yes.
I can understand for older men, maybe it's the change of career, inability to earn income.
Yeah.
But for younger men to feel so isolated and to turn to, drugs and isolation is really heartbreaking, as you say.
Yes, because they actually, if you look at the figures for how they're graduating, there are less boys graduating from high school and less young men graduating from university. You actually have now more women graduating and coming into the workforce with degrees and academic qualifications and whatnot. Men have fallen behind. So you look at also the crime rate in the UK, you have a lot of knife crime. In the US, you have a lot of gun crime committed by young men. Now, I say this with confidence, and there are a lot of people who may disagree with me, but I don't believe the US has a gun problem. I don't believe the UK has a knife crime problem. I think both countries have a boy crisis because there is a huge increase the last 20 to 30 years in the number of fatherless young men who have been raised by single mothers. Consequently, they don't know how to be a man. They're confused about how to be a man. So they want some kind of validation. What do? They hide, they cave, they get into drugs, or they join a violent gang. You see, you have to realize a woman is very capable. I beg your pardon. Sorry, go ahead.
Is this your own view that because of an absence of a father role model, they don't have anyone to look up to or to form their personalities around?
It's not my personal view. It's the research that I've looked into by experts from universities and top of the range professors from Harvard and Yale. Some of them are the likes of Philip Zimbardo, who's a pioneer in his work, or Dr. Farrell, who wrote a book called The Boy Crisis. Everything I say is backed up by evidence. I'm not that opinionated to declare what I think. Based on everything I've found out, I am very confident in what I'm saying. Yeah. So this is a big problem that we're facing. And I'm not saying just because young men lack a father figure, they go into all these things. There are some young men who have not had a father and end up being remarkably successful. One of whom is Barack Obama. He grew up without a father.
Sure.
But if you look at the numbers, the majority who don't have a father figure, and I say a father figure or a loving older male who is a mentor, that's missing. I'm all about feminism, and fundamentally, women do not need a man. Women are very capable to stand on their own feet and feed a family. However, you do need a father and a mother to raise a good, healthy family. Young girls don't have this.
I agree with you. And a friend of mine recently, a male friend of mine recently said, you women are okay to live on your own, but a man can't live on his own. And I thought that was very interesting because I never thought, that it was okay for a woman to live on her own. But I wanted to ask you, is it, if the problem is that they have been raised by a single parent who is a woman, the research, does it go into why this woman is single? Does it go into why does the man leave the marriage or leave the child?
I mean,
or anything like that?
That's a very good question, but for the sake of the time we have together, I'd rather avoid that tangent because it's such a broad area to talk about and quite challenging, to be honest, because there's so many factors one can look at. However, I would like to focus a little bit about what's going on in society that is also contributing to men withdrawing from the world. There are many components that are going on, and they seem to be working together simultaneously, unfortunately. One is the mindset, and second is biology. There have been a lot of links with drug use and propensity to commit suicide. So that's one. So you have to look at the biochemistry of the brain in terms of the hormone level, the neurotransmitters, et cetera, et cetera. You also have to look at nutrition, gut health, vitamins, minerals, et cetera, et cetera. However, you have to also bear in mind that men as a gender, they're not very comfortable sharing opinions and personal feelings comfortably and open up too much. So, for example, if you compare the two genders, a woman, generally speaking, and I'm saying this generally, she seems to have a far better network of friends and family for support, such as sister, mothers, grandmothers, neighbors, colleagues at work. She opens up, she talks, she cries, she feels better. Men historically invest in one, maybe two people emotionally. And when that relationship deteriorates, they don't have anyone else to open up their hearts to. So they implode and they withdraw and they go into clinical depression. So you might have the mask of comedy and being a joker, and then they kill themselves, such as Robin Williams. You might have the mask of confidence and self-assurance, such as Anthony Bourdain, who also killed himself. You might have someone who is in the limelight and is a pioneer in what he does, like Alexander McQueen, and he kills himself as well. And the list goes on. Legislation is also much harder on men when they go through a divorce. Women have far more rights. Men have limited visitation rights. They have to support financially. So it's almost rigged against men. Also, like I said, lack of positive male role models, which doesn't help. And it's not necessarily a father. It could be an uncle, a neighbor, a teacher, a mentor of someone of some kind who takes the young boy under his wing and teaches him how to be a man. Because a mom is most capable in churning out fantastic daughters who are confident. But when it comes to boys, a boy needs a man to become a man. This is not my opinion. This is fact. The other thing I'd like...
It makes sense because it's probably easier for a man to share with a man.
Go ahead, please.
In your career, did you notice that more men are asking for help, coming for a coach or a mentor? Or is it still a taboo to go and talk to someone about it?
Okay, that's a good point, because it's increasing now. There are more men who are addressing themselves and sort of acknowledging the self-care aspect of life, which is terrific. And the younger generation seem to be more open to that. But you have to understand that the psychology of a man is very different to a woman. A man is not designed to, men are not good at human being. They're good at human doing. They'd rather go out and do. Men are designed and hardwired historically to go and hunt together as a tribe, to bring home the animal and feed the tribe, to go out and fight wars, to protect the women and children. So that as long as a man is doing and he's out there being productive, being the hero, being the servant to serve his community and his family, or whatever gives his life meaning, then his life is fulfilled. But that's missing these days, unfortunately.
But don't men hang out with other men and then they talk about stuff, or don't they?
Not necessarily. They hang out and talk about sports. They talk about lifting weights. They talk about fishing. But it's not about talking that they enjoy. It's sometimes just being together and validating one another. So if I'm a young boy and I'm 16 years old and my father takes me fishing and I've never fished before, and I catch a small fish and he looks at me, he's like, well done, that's a great fish. You're going to be a great fisherman. My heart glows because I'm getting approval and validation from someone senior. And men do that together. men do that together because they do have a negative banter with one. They tease each other, but it's all designed to build themselves up. And men help each other when it comes to things like that. However, you look at life in 2020 compared to 1945 or 1935. Men are living separate lives. Men are not involved in community as much as they used to. They're hiding behind technology. They've become virtual as opposed to real because of the lifestyle that we have. Consequently, there's a lot of loneliness that's going on. Even there's a chap called Professor John Cacioppo of University of Chicago, who said we live in the most lonely time of humanity that's ever been. And men are having it that way too, because men are used to being together. There's something else I want to mention, which I think the viewers might benefit from knowing as well. And that is that there seems to be a culture war and some kind of crusade against men in pop culture. Men are ridiculed in advertising to be stupid and thick. In sitcoms and movies, they're made to look like a buffoon, and the heroine of the show ends up being a woman. There's a variety of different things I can share with you. For example, the Labour politician in the New Zealand Parliament stood up a few years ago and said, "I am sorry for being a man," because he was made to feel guilty already for just being a man. You look at advertising such as T-Mobile in, I think it was 2015, there was an ad during Super Bowl Sunday in America where a woman is giving birth in the hospital and the doctor who's delivering the baby is a woman. So the baby comes out and the doctor looks at the woman and says, "I'm sorry, it's a boy." And there's so much more advertising and so much more.
That should have been stopped. I would have really stopped
well,
that.
Should have, would have, could have.
Advertising in England.
I understand, but there seems to be a demonization of men in society as though they are bad because there's some kind of patriarchy, etc., which I'm not really going to get into because then it gets into political. So I'm empathizing with a young man who comes into the world and all of a sudden he's made to feel guilty for being a man. He's made to look stupid and ridiculed by society. So he withdraws because he's not the type. Men are not going to sit and fight and argue and debate. They just hide because it's too complicated and it's too painful. They'd rather go and play Grand Theft Auto at home or some violent video game because they need to let out all that aggression, which is part of their nature. Men are more aggressive, they take more risks, and they're designed that way so they can be the protectors. So this is all evolutionary psychology as well. There's so much we could talk about. So you've got all that going on. Plus, one last thing I want to mention before you can ask a question is that as men grow older, between the ages of 20 and 45, a lot of changes take place in a man's life. So things such as heartbreak, divorce, loss, death of a parent, death of a child, death of a spouse, betrayal, failures, redundancy, being fired from work, social circles shrink as well. Emotional investment sometimes in that one person goes away and they're very much alone. So because of all the drastic changes, a lot of young men also ancestors may have had. So you've got.
Sorry, I lost you for a few minutes. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So like I said, they lack the network of people for support because they're so lonely. Social circles shrink. They lose friends. They get fired. Appointments, etc., etc. So there's between 20 and the age of 50. And during that time, there's a lot of life blows and pains that a man has to go through. And sometimes they just don't know how to process that because we're living such insular life to how we used to 50 years ago.
Yeah. Am I losing you? Or are you still on? Okay.
I am. Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get near the Wi-Fi. You're cutting off a little bit, but I think we're doing okay.
All right.
So because of the isolation and all these upheavals that they go to, what can you and I as mentor and coaches do?
It's a good question. Fundamentally, all we can do is encourage men to be a little bit more self-aware because everything begins with awareness of how I'm doing. And I think men need to, if there's one thing they need to more than anything else, is to pay more attention to their self-care. And unfortunately, a lot of men focus on the facade of going to the gym and building up the biceps and the shoulders and the chest and the six-pack and getting that beach body that attracts the opposite sex, which is wonderful. Why not? I go to the gym myself. However, self-care is more than just the physical. Self-care has to involve the emotional and the psychological, as well as your nutrition and hormonal balance as well. So there's a lot that you have to consider. The more self-aware you are, the more you're capable of looking at the warning signs that you are giving yourself about what you need. It could be sleep. It could be that I'm very lonely. Great, let's find out. What do I need? A bigger circle of friends, a better quality of partner. Maybe the one you're with isn't working, whatever. But self-care is crucial to a man's well-being, and I think men should pay more attention to that. Now, there's a fine line between self-care and narcissism, and I think it's good to keep that balance as well.
Yeah, I want to ask you, let's say we have a young family and they have a son. How can they begin to instill in that son that it's okay to talk about feelings, it's okay to share? Do you know what I mean? So we have two things: when men are young, and then when men are older and they go into their cave. How does a woman communicate with her husband, with her boyfriend, with her partner?
That's a $1 million question there, Sahar. Yeah, it's not easy, because I as much as one can generalize, every relationship is so different because the nature of the relationship between each couple might vary. I mean, my wife and I have been together for 19 years, and she looks at me and she can tell there's something wrong, and we talk about it. And initially my answer is, as a man, is nothing, I'm fine. And I might need a walk, I need to go to the gym, and I vocalize. But some relationships are not necessarily that.
Because you know what I see? I see that women take over, or are expected to take over, raising the children. And I see men loving their work and their careers, and they hardly spend any time with children. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying these are the roles that society's place on us. And as such, the boy does grow up, even in a mother-father family, without really having a role model. And because we're also separate now, uncles don't interfere, or male friends don't interfere. So there's no one for that young boy to talk about. And I often tell the women, most of my clients, or let's say 60% of my clients are women. I always tell them, but you're raising that boy. How are you raising him? Because it's women who raise the men as well. So we do need, I think, both a male role model and a female role model. And I need the women, if you will, to kind of understand that men go into the cave. I didn't know that was a man thing. I mean, physiologically, as you said, and psychologically. But what is your advice to a man who feels all that you have described? Where do you begin when you get a man who feels deeply isolated, depressed, low, and has no one? How do you begin to bring him back from his cave? Do you have any tips for us women?
Well, the most important tip is to associate. I mean, before we answer this question, I mean, I don't know how much time we have together, but there is something fundamental we have to address there, and that is based on the research of a guy called Professor Michael Herzfeld, who taught at Harvard University, and there was another guy called Jack Donovan, who wrote a book called The Way of Men. Both of them emphasize the following. There's a difference between being good at being a man, and there's a difference between being a good man. Okay. Now here's a very difficult question to answer. What does it mean to be a man? Every society has a different definition. In the US, it's different to Tokyo. In Tokyo, it's different to Nigeria. In Saudi Arabia, it's different to Norway. You can't really define that very easily. However, there are certain common denominators that every man on the planet considers a virtue. And they are responsibility, strength, to not necessarily, and I don't mean physical strength, but strength of spirit in the sense of willpower and being a strong character.
Strength of character, yes.
Yeah. Thirdly is courage, courage is essentially your strength manifest in kinetic form, and competence, being competent in something, being a master at doing something, whether you're an engineer or an electrician or a teacher. As long as you're good at and you're competent in doing that, then that's also a very valuable virtue among men.
Okay.
Because men really want each other's validation more than women. And finally, reputation. Men really care about their reputation. That's why as soon as they lose their job, it's almost like they've lost their sense of honor and identity. If they lose a battle, they come back as losers and they've lost face. And even their testosterone levels drop. So there's a biochemical reaction as well. So there's so much, these 5 components create the virtues of manhood among men on the planet. So, and these are not necessarily moral or immoral. They are amoral. So it's got nothing to do with morality. You could have a drug dealer like Tony Montana and Scarface, who all men love. So men respect and admire these qualities, regardless whether that man who's good at being a man is a good man or an evil man. So that's fundamental that we have to know. You can only be a good man after you are being good at being a man. Unfortunately, the modern man feels that they lack the manhood components that they ought to have. And they focus more on being a good man. The problem with that, when you focus on just being a good man, you end up being placid, flaccid, compliant, and you end up being a very well-behaved slave who does what he's told. And that's when they deep down feel they're not good enough and they withdraw. They don't become good partners, they don't become good employees, and consequently they almost lose their mojo. I met a lady a while ago, and she was your classic horrible woman who emasculated her husband into a very small man. She was bossing him around. The only problem is when you emasculate your husband because you want to be the powerful person at home, that man's character gets almost out of balance and shrunk. So at work, he actually was demoted to a position with a smaller salary. So she actually ended up biting herself in the backside by that, because when a woman strengthens a man, when a woman encourages a man to be the best he can be, all parties benefit, all society benefits. So it's win-win for everybody. When a man is at his optimum, he is the best father, the best husband, the most reliable boyfriend you could have, someone you can trust and trust with your life. When men are weak, that's when they're dangerous.
Can I just say, from my personal view, I don't see men as men and I don't see women as women. I see them as people. And I think it is absolutely hurtful and very wrong to demean any human being, whether it's your husband or your son or your wife or whatever it is. And this is my objective tonight, to build that bridge so that we stop, to begin with, we see them as people, not as the other enemy that we have to compete with or diss or prove something against, because I never felt that.
Yeah, we are people, and I like that. We need to get it.
How can we, Taymour, how can we as women, I'm speaking on behalf of all women tonight, how can we support you, men, at becoming better at being a man?
Okay, that's a good question. You just reminded me of a famous quote by Sigmund Freud, and he said, a woman should not weaken a man, a woman should strengthen a man.
Nice.
Yeah, as soon as you weaken a man, it's lose-lose for everybody. But if you strengthen your man,
I absolutely agree.
And I don't, it's not about emasculating a man. A man's masculinity is his strength. And there's a lot of talk in advertising and pop culture that talks about toxic masculinity. And pardon my French, I think it's utter nonsense and bullshit. I think masculinity is what's missing among men, because when a man is masculine, he has a dignified confidence in his beliefs and his ability and his identity. And he becomes the type of man you can rely on for protection, for support, for love, for unconditional love. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of young boys, because they haven't had that father figure who has taught them healthy masculinity that can help them navigate and negotiate life, which hits you the hardest. The hardest opponent is life. And it's brutal when it hits you. and it hits you so hard that you get flattened on the floor and you have to get back up. And you need that emotional support and strength and resilience to get back up. And I think that's, the famous saying behind every successful man is a woman. I couldn't agree more, because a woman's role is so powerful. She is so much more powerful than she gives herself credit for, that she can make or break a man.
Can we agree on perhaps that kindness is important to all human beings, to be kind by word, whether it's a man dealing with a woman or a woman dealing with a man, or, when we're dealing with children? I think if we are good at being human beings, then we will be better at being a woman that supports a man, or a man at being a man, or at just being human beings. I mean, don't you think it just boils down to really investing in our children or the next generation to teach them how to become better human beings?
I'm going to say something quite controversial. I have been in the self-help industry since 2003. My problem with self-help industry, and I'm saying this with great confidence, is that it has placed so much attention and focus on self-esteem and happiness and joy, and it hasn't focused enough on giving your life meaning and purpose. The moment you focus on meaning, you are willing to put up with life's difficulties. But as soon as you are focused on pleasure and fun and still being a child, you'll always end up disappointed. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Values in life, like
absolutely.
Especially men, they identify themselves, according to their, hierarchy in the corporate world. All of that kind of went really wrong the last 20 years.
Yeah, but as Jordan Peterson says, you find meaning in responsibility.
From my point of view, it's more about accountability. So I see responsibility also as accountability. I'm not against pleasure. You need pleasure because it helps you to do the things that you need to do. Yeah. But I think anything in extreme will tip the balance.
I agree. And unfortunately, there is a lot of freedom in today's world. And freedom is a wonderful thing to have. But there's a lot of focus on freedom and what are my rights and what am I entitled to, as opposed to what I'm responsible for. As soon as you have freedom without responsibility, you have chaos and not order.
Yeah, or let me say freedom without boundaries, because if you don't know what your boundaries are, you're bound to step on other people's toes, whether they're men or women.
Yeah, but those boundaries are dictated by responsibility, that you know where your boundaries are. So you need to have both in tandem. But when you only focus on what you're entitled to and what you are free to do, it malfunctions. It just doesn't work. Yeah. Life is hard. Life is brutal. You need to realize that you need to strengthen your resilience to cope. And what gives you that, what motivates you, is meaning.